For this lesson, I'm going to be going over some chemical groups that we call functional groups. And this is going to be something I'm going to ask you to learn and honestly to memorize. So for this next unit, we're going to be looking at the chemistry of carbon. And of course, carbon is what makes living things. All the compounds that make up living things and ultimately cells and whole organisms, it's all based on carbon. Now, some of the time when we talk about carbon chemistry, we talk about biochemistry or biological molecules, but really the term for compounds that are made from carbon is organic. So when we say we're studying organic chemistry, it's the chemistry of carbon. Most of it from life forms, some of it not from life forms. It just depends. So it's the chemistry of carbon is organic chemistry. Now, in these biological molecules or these organic compounds, you will see certain groupings of atoms, and they have unique chemical properties. Okay, so these certain chemical groups, you'll find them attached to various biological molecules, and they're important to biology because they have unique properties. So I want you to learn to recognize these groups and understand what to expect chemically and biologically if a particular molecule has these groups. So I'm going to go over, there are 7 of the groups, and I'm going to go over each one, and then I want you to learn them. The first is called hydroxyl group. It is an oxygen and a hydrogen, and you'll see this line, which means it's going to be bonded to something else on this end. So oxygen makes 2 bonds. It's got one covalent bond with a hydrogen. The other one is just sticking off. It's going to attach to something else. This is sometimes called an alcohol. It's found in alcohols, ethanol, methanol, propanol. It's also found in sugars. So you'll see an OH group like this hanging off of sugars. This molecule here is ethanol, but a lot of times we'll be looking at the structure of glucose and the structure of sucrose and these different sugars, and you'll see these hydroxyl groups. The next is an amino group. An amino group is a nitrogen bonded to 2 hydrogens or 3 hydrogens, depending. This is found in nucleotide bases and in amino acids, which is what you see here, a very basic amino acid structure. And here you have the nitrogen with the 3 hydrogens. This is the amino group. Next is the carboxyl group. This is a carbon that's double bonded to an oxygen and bonded to a hydroxyl group on the side. And again, you have this little bond here that's going to bond to something else. This is the carboxyl group, and you'll see it's attached here on this molecule. Next is the sulfhydryl group. This is a component of compounds called thiols. It's found in the amino acid cysteine, which I show you here, and it's also in many cofactors that we'll talk about next week. But it is a sulfur bonded to a hydrogen. Sulfur is in the oxygen group, so it makes 2 bonds just like oxygen does. So this sulfhydryl group is kind of like a hydroxyl group, but with a sulfur instead of an oxygen. Next is very important, the phosphate group. This is a phosphorus with a bunch of oxygens around it. Sometimes you'll see 3, sometimes you'll see 4 oxygens around it. And notice these oxygens are hogging up some electrons, so they're actually negatively charged. The phosphate group by itself sometimes carries a negative charge. This is found in nucleotides, such as those found in DNA and RNA, phospholipids, and in some proteins as well. This happens to be adenosine triphosphate, ATP, and you can see this phosphate group here. Actually, this is adenosine diphosphate. There's only 2 phosphates there, but you get the idea. Next is the methyl group. Methyl group is a carbon that's bonded all the way around with hydrogens, and then of course we've got this spare bond that's going to hook onto something else. The methyl group is found in fatty acids and in some amino acids, and we'll talk about a methyl group getting attached to DNA and what it does on the DNA and the RNA later in the year. And finally, the last group is the acetyl group. The acetyl group is a carbon double bonded to an oxygen and another carbon with 3 hydrogens going around. So this CH3, you have to imagine 3 hydrogens bonded to that carbon. This is found in some proteins and in some coenzymes, such as coenzyme A, which is shown here. And you can see it located here on the end of coenzyme A. So those are your 7 functional groups. You're going to have to learn them, and we'll talk more about them in class.